Hey there everyone, it's Jen, the Board Game Librarian, coming to you with our third book review. Today we're going to take a look at The Pull of the Stars by Emma Donoghue. So I'm in a new book club for the board game industry professionals, and this Pull of the Stars by Emma Donoghue was our selection for April. And I read Room years and years and years ago for another book club, and I remember listening to it and kind of being like everyone else, just riveted by the story and horrified, of course, by this woman and her son's tale. So she had kind of fallen off my radar for a little bit, Emma Donoghue, and I should say, I don't typically read a lot of historical fiction anymore. I had read a ton in years gone by, a lot of it. And I read so many different things these days that things just aren't on my radar. So I was glad to have read this one. However, I listened to it, which I think is very important to the review that you're going to hear right now. So in The Pull of the Stars, it is the end of October 1918 into November 1918, 3 days in Dublin, Ireland, in a maternity ward in a hospital. And our main character is Nurse Julia Powers, and she is basically in charge of the ward for these 3 days. And in charge of a very small variety of women that come in. Now, the important thing to remember is that World War I is ending. We're not that far out from the armistice. And two, we are in the throngs of the pandemic of 1918. Ooh, the big influenza that happened 100 years ago. So I think some of us felt a little like, ooh, a pandemic book, which is probably how many of us have felt reading pandemic books, since there's been quite a large variety of them that have come out in the last year or two. So this was 8 discs on audio and very well read. And I had no idea when I listened to it that there were no quotation marks anywhere in the entire book, that was a style choice that Donoghue had made. So I think for people reading this book, that's a really important point for you to know going in. There's no quotation marks. And Donoghue apparently had wanted the experience of you reading the book for it to be very intense, very chaotic, very in the moment too. I think listening to it helped because you got the different voices and the different inflections, but I can see how your reading experience would be very different. We also have other main characters like Bridie. We have Dr. Kathleen Lynn, who was a real person, and we have the women who are in the maternity ward while Julia is working. So Julia is 30 years old. She is an unmarried woman who lives with her brother Tim, who has just come back has just been back from World War I. He does not speak anymore because of his experience in World War I and what he had seen and what had happened to him. He doesn't talk anymore. Julia works very long hours in the maternity ward. She is doing everything like our nurses do today. And we have a lot of social issues that are going on at this point too. We have Dr. Kathleen Lynn, who had been one of the revolutionaries for a free Ireland. She appears, and that was true to her in real life. We have some back and forth going on with sexism and how the role of women is really changing, especially in the UK in 1918. We're still a little bit out from every woman gaining the right to vote. We have just class issues that are going on, which is very clearly seen in the women that are in the maternity ward, from somewhat privileged middle class Irish women all the way down to the very, very poor unwed woman who comes along. So I enjoyed this book. You know, I failed last time in putting a rating. I usually do 1 to 5, with 1 being, oof, Jenn, really bad choice, didn't finish it, and 5 being amazing, one of my all-time favorites. I would recommend this to everyone. This was a 3.5. There wasn't anything that I particularly loved about this book, but there wasn't anything I particularly disliked either. Julia is a good character, but as I said in book club last night, the side character, Bridie Sweeney, who is essentially a volunteer helper and is the one who brings humanity to this book. That we see kind of the outside perspective a lot from Bridie Sweeney. You know, in terms, it's very interesting having been through a pandemic now and reading a book about a pandemic where, you know, some things are so very the same, you know, in terms of wearing a mask, ventilation, people refusing to wear masks, people not listening to medical, or, you know, guidance or political guidance. So, you know, that was still going on 100 years ago. And I would say you have to have a lot of respect too for nurses, especially in this time where they didn't have necessarily as many tools as we do today, or the medical knowledge, that they're doing a variety of different things that, you know, to them are the best and the latest. The title Pull of the Stars comes from the fact that influenza has to do with the stars. I'll put it a better definition of it, or where it came from, in the description below. But I kept wondering, what does that mean, the pull of the stars? And I believe it's Dr. Kathleen Lynn in the book who talks about the pull of the stars and our fate. You know, do we have control of our own fate? Is it everything left to the stars? And I would say in this book it very much depends, because if you're someone who is more privileged, who has better status, then you have more control over your own fate of sorts. But some of the other women in this book who are of lower class, they have no control over their fate. They have no control over what happens to themselves, to their children in one particular case. And I would say that that's probably still very true today in terms of how we are able to control our own fate. Some of the things that I really enjoyed about this book were the pacing. I really enjoyed that, in the length too. It's not very large. It's less than 300 pages. It's including her note, it's 295, so not a very long book at all. And sometimes we need those shorter books to kind of get us through. I would say that for some people, this book might not be a good read for right now, especially with everything going on in the world with the pandemic. I am happy that I read this book because it's one that I can recommend to people at work, at the library, when they're looking for things to read, especially those who are into historical fiction. And I'd be curious what you have to say. Have you read The Pull of the Stars? What did you think about it? Did you read it or listen to it? How was your experience different than mine? And that is all for this time, folks. We'll see you next time.